This is an oral presentation for the Sport and Exercise Psychology Unit of the University of New England, submitted by John Ardubalde and submitted to Dr. John Scott Hamilton.
Hi, I'm John Ardubalde. Today I'm going to give you a general view of motivation, and we'll also determine the two main sources of motivation, and we'll discuss how we could balance these two main sources to harness your prospects in sports. Later, we'll also talk about the trait-centered view of motivation, and we'll discuss why this perspective is very unrealistic, particularly in sports. Now, if you're not adequately motivated, you simply won't spend more time or efforts practicing your skills. And sometimes our motivation and not our technical knowledge in the sporting fields is what separates really good performances from the average ones. We define motivation in terms of the direction and effort we try to put in certain activities. In general, motivation has three components. Number one is the direction. The second is our persistence, or our desire to continue on. And the third and the last is the amount of energy we devote to our activity. So it is important to know how to find your motivation and how to stay motivated. And when discussing motivation, we need to remember that all these are part of an internal process. So that is why we must infer motivation from our behavior. Now, the self-determination theory asserts that our motivation to be active occurs along a continuum. And this motivation is influenced by many behavioral constructs, like external regulation, identified regulation, and intrinsic motivation, to name a few. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are what we'll call essential forms of motivation. In extrinsic motivation, your motivation comes from the outside, so you don't do an activity for its own sake, but rather your impetus lies externally, say getting financial rewards, or winning an Olympic medal, or getting some media attention. There's a drawback, however, with being preoccupied by external compensations, and people who are mostly extrinsically motivated can become demoralized if they're not meeting their expectations. Self-determination, or your need to feel competent, is the underlying root of intrinsic motivation. And whenever you strive to better your performance in the football field, for example, or you learn new skills to simply feel competent or for your enjoyment, or to master your skills, then this is your intrinsic motivation at work. Now, pressure to do well is absent when you are intrinsically motivated. So you participate in your sport simply because you enjoy it. Research on self-determination theory has found that autonomous motivation, like intrinsic motivation, actually produces better outcomes than, say, if you're using controlled motivations like extrinsic motivation. Okay, one myth about motivation that is fairly predominant in sports is that There are some people, I don't know, who are just inherently motivated, and perhaps more so than you and me. And this is quite a dangerous misunderstanding, because just as nobody is devoid of motivation, we just don't have built-in motivational reserves. Lastly, since you really can't quantify motivation, even our own views, my views, on this topic can be somewhat imprecise. But luckily there are general rules that we can follow through to maximize our motivation. As general rules to maximize your motivation in sports, you need to decide what you want to achieve. Secondly, check for obstacles that could or are preventing you from succeeding. Then, identify your steps to get rid of these barriers. Lastly, commit to your specific goals and always stay focused. Remember that you can only become better by what you're trying to accomplish now.